Let her conquer fear and fall like a soul. I run into the heat of day, like a knife I fight until the fight is won. In the rain I save each and every one till this war is won. Resident Evil.
Hello, ladies and G-viruses, and welcome to tonight's review of Resident Evil, the game that launched 1,000 copycats and the entire survival horror and tank control genre for the PSX era. It's always something special when you go back to these revolutionary games for retro reviews and see how they hold up to today's modern standards. Was the game truly deserving of its reputation for being the genre revival spearhead, or was it just good timing that everyone got to play it? Let us return to the Spencer Mansion and figure out what's what. The game wastes no time and starts the story of the STARS unit in quintessential Capcom fashion, and something I might make into a backstory backfire video down the line. Resident Evil starts with the STARS unit, Raccoon City Police's elite division, investigating some vague incidents in the Arklay Mountains when their helicopter inevitably crashes and leaves them wandering the forest until their scent is tracked by some zombie dogs. Because the STARS unit is comprised entirely of 20 to 25-year-olds on their first day on the job, the entire division is completely unprepared for battling the zombie dogs, and so decide to leg it only to end up in a giant mansion built in the middle of the mountain range. Yes, the iconic Spencer Mansion is only in this game because the zombie dogs at the start of it just randomly decide to run in this direction. I wonder how the traitor among stars factored that into their master plan. The STARS members find it strange that the mansion is completely abandoned and begin searching the house for either a way out that's safer, or for the rest of the squad when it got split up. Thankfully, one person who tagged along with Chris and Jill was Barry Burton, the most capable man in the multiverse, and companion to Jill if you're playing as her, which I did. Before I even started playing Resident Evil, I did do a Google search to see what the community thought would be the better playthrough, Jill or Chris. Literally nobody, and not even the idiot dog, came out to the defense of the roided out dunce, and so today's review is done on a Jill normal play of Resident Evil. Stick with the game for a little over 60 seconds and Jill will run into the first zombie, another iconic part of the franchise who surprisingly became a sort of recurring villain of mine during my first time playing the original survival horror game, because not only did the first zombie come back to life twice and was hard to put down both times, he also came back as a crimson zombie who was even worse. This guy was unfucking believable. Now that things are going horror style, the STARS unit splits up in random directions to continue searching the mansion. Wesker and Barry are doing things off screen and Chris disappears from the picture altogether. What follows is a few hours tour of one of the most ludicrous video game settings ever devised by human minds, with nonsense puzzles birthed from the psyche of a madman who was secretly murdering his own contractors for shits and giggles, and then accidentally quote-unquote spread the T-virus everywhere, so that the puzzle rooms and hallways are now filled with zombos. Biohazard has always been a series filled to the brim with silly puzzles, but it helps bring out the doofy B-movie charm that the franchise has always had, filling its locations with stupidly over-designed contraptions and computers being built by people so thick that they write down every one of their confidential passwords, and then the rest is a cavalcade of weird keys fitting into weird locks. Plus, you also have to find all the locks. It's a good balance between involving and uninvolving gameplay that builds the cohesive world of the mansion, since it unlocks incrementally, allowing the player a sense of always discovering new things about a location that gets very familiar quickly. And then you get to solve some riddles devised by the most sleepy puzzle master on the planet. Spencer's Mansion really is the prime example of someone's secret passage bookcase fantasies going to the absolute extreme. I would completely slot the Spencer Mansion right alongside Shadow Moses Island for iconic video game settings, because the two, among others, managed to hit that sweet spot of building their own brand of gameplay and style. Something that is quite truly their own thing, because while having the art style and the puzzles does help, what really puts the pair over the top is the characters and set pieces you actually find, the boss fights and the regular enemies, along with being able to backtrack while also exploring at the same time. It's a place that is never going to be 100% replicated, and both the franchise and copycats will be trying to recreate the memorable place for years to come. And unlike the Resident Evil 0 that we did last month, it seems that when Capcom started this little venture, they were less heavy-handed and punishing about the survival horror elements, which I'm all for, because Resi 0 was a stingy game and compared to the original Resi that even in the normal mode of the game gives you some resource caches throughout the beginning parts of the game that can easily be passed over to the later bits, and got us to such a point that I somehow managed to have more health than ammo at my disposal, which is just stupefying. Thank God for Barry Burton, who was the real hero in all this, managing to find first aid sprays and grenade rounds that he somehow didn't need. Probably because he has the infinite ammo magnum at his disposal. The goal for the STARS unit remained the same after the zombies were discovered, searching the mansion for clues and rescuing the lost members. Spoiler alert, none of the off-screeners survived. Along for the antagonistic ride is a subplot involving one of the STARS unit members planning a traitorous movement against their old co-workers for unknown reasons. This betrayal plot probably would have worked better if we had gotten to know more of the STARS unit members, but as it stands, there are only 2 suspects in the game, and one of them is wearing sunglasses at night, so the mystery ends up as flimsy as a dollar bill on a water slide. Thankfully, Resident Evil decided to focus on the gameplay of exploration and zombie annihilation, because the guys down at Capcom could be outwritten by an unmotivated 15-year-old doing a book report on the novelization of Jaws. Just like how the Spencer Mansion became the golden standard for video game locales, the survival horror gameplay from the same also became the stock model for most of the tank control games of the 5th generation. It's a simple and effective style of play where the player is given an attack stance and 3 directions to shoot targets, and also armed with enough bullets to make killing most of the monsters you come up against a viable option rather than Silent Hill, which favored having the player run through town and away from an infinitely respawning cloud of claws and teeth. It's a slippery and unintuitive combat model due to the entire lack of aiming and bad camera perspectives, which makes it hard to get a beat on enemies sometimes, but it ends up being appropriate for the survival horror style that Capcom was going for, and the model mostly works because Capcom designed their zombies like stereotypical zombies. They're lumbering and slow, have no idea what they're doing until they are literally on top of the player, and Resident Evil gives the player a self-defense option, which allows the player to both fight off attacks and also deal heavy damage to the one attacking them at the same time if they have a self-defense item such as daggers and tasers. It's a gameplay style that makes the player vulnerable to the threats, while also giving them options to deal with things when shit hits the wall. Another clever and terrifying tactic that directly allows the player to choose how much bullcrap they want to deal with is the introduction to the Crimson Zombies, a variant on the regular zombie that comes about when you leave a corpse on the floor too long, and so the virus that created it evolves into a quicker and more painful to deal with zombie. The caveat to this is that the Crimson Zombies can be avoided a lot of the time if the player spends time to find gas cans throughout the level and use them on corpses to burn the corpse and prevent the evolution. It takes a lot of time to accomplish, and it's incredibly fiddly and annoying to both find the gas cans and then burn the zombies, and also if you are an idiot, the fire can actually damage you on occasion. But the Crimson Zombie thing is an organic upscaling of the difficulty curve that I can appreciate because it's quite literally a player choice to make. Plus, the punishment of dealing with a Crimson Zombie isn't actually impossible to meet by any stretch. It's just more annoying to do so. Additionally, unlike the Medusa Head tradition that should have died long ago, Capcom decided to leave the Crimson Zombie out of most, if not all, other games in the franchise, which is surprising in an industry that likes to keep around iconic jerkwads of difficult nonsense for tradition's sake alone. Ironic for a genre that revels in overpowering the players. The boss fights in the game are remarkably tame as bosses go. I remember a couple boss fights in Resi Zero that really threw me for a loop, but it looks like in the original, like most of Resi's design, it seems like Capcom was paddling in the shallow end before diving deeper, which I can appreciate, especially if the original is still solid, unlike when Assassin's Creed started out with a 7 out of 10 at best. The showdowns with creatures such as Yawn, the Black Widow, and even the original Tyrant are pretty short and straightforward with surprisingly few cheap shots, along with some wide camera angles, so this game was more designed to give an edge to the player instead of the monsters. Hell, I think the first phase of the Tyrant boss fight was done in less than a minute, and I'm pretty sure that the Tyrant could only eat about 5 to 6 Magnum rounds before it fell over, so whatever the T-Virus is feeding these random organisms isn't doing all that well for them. Even with this in mind, when the game starts dancing around these boss fights and special encounters, it still keeps a high grip of tension on the player, because they still carry that potential to absolutely wreck your shit while you're trying to figure out what the boss's tells are and all that jazz. But of course, those ups and downs of difficulty, along with the types of rooms that you find in the Spencer Mansion, are needed to keep the game interesting. It's all about giving the player a constant stream of new stuff to enjoy fighting against, whether it is new enemies or puzzles. Through health pickups and a decent variety of guns to find, the game makes a good progression from beginning to end, and while it isn't so narratively driven, the lore surrounding the Spencer Mansion helps to build an intriguing world of an Earth with the Umbrella Corporation, as the T-Virus quickly becomes unleashed and then totally uncontrolled in later entries in the series. As people love to point out, it still amazes me personally that the Tyrant Project was able to produce any results through the unfathomably awful containment policies of its experimenters that was allowing the company to lose researchers hand over fist since they were stupid enough to not believe that the biological weapons they were working towards would be a bit dangerous to human beings, and it wasn't long before the T-Virus began infecting the people working on it because Capcom wrote Umbrella to being completely staffed by massive idiots. This happened long before the STARS unit even showed up, which led to the lab's abandonment and eventual slotting in for total destruction. Of course, the self-destruct procedure had to be overseen by someone to protect this incredibly illegal research that Umbrella was conducting at the location, and so, at the end of the game, we finally figure out who the traitor among stars was. And of course it was Albert Wesker, the guy who disappeared for 90% of the game's runtime and quote-unquote was securing the mansion. What surprised me was a cutscene that happened during the residence level. That was a cabin built behind the Spencer Mansion for Capcom reasons, where Wesker actually shows up and tries to throw suspicion from him to Barry. Yeah, Barry might have been gone from the game exactly as long as you have, Wesker, but he was the one who saved Jill from the shotgun trap, so no dice on that one. Although I will say the oldest STARS member didn't exactly do himself any favors in building trust when he decided to abandon Jill for no reason that one time underground. Since we are still playing Resident Evil, Wesker reveals that he's working for Umbrella and yet doesn't seem to have much of a plan to follow through on other than destroying the mansion and fleeing the situation. To help him bide some time from Jill and Barry's firearms, Wesker releases the final Tyrant specimen to distract them or get data on his combat readiness. Such a shame that it didn't work out, since literally the first thing it did once awakened was flat out kill Albert Wesker in one shot, and then sort of wound Barry, which can totally be undone with some words of encouragement. The game ends with a final showdown against the tyrant, which boils down to a survival match for a minute or two, with a boss that's a lot faster and more deadly than it should be, since it can knock down half of your health bar in one shot, and there's no real good way of dodging it, along with the lack of health items in the arena itself. If you can keep yourself alive for a little bit, then the helicopter pilot drops a rocket launcher on you to finish the game with. The damn thing has 4 rounds in it, but all you need to do is lock on one and reduce the ultimate biological monster to a small puddle of goo just before the entire place goes up in flames. Ultimately, while Resident Evil obviously has its problems, it is clear to see how this game launched 1,000 copycats and set the world on fire, and it wasn't because the game was perfect, but most franchises are not perfect. Fallout, Zelda, Ratchet and Clank, while they each have their own problems, they build their brand of mixing their pros and cons into something called charm, a game that feels uniquely its own. Resident Evil launched its franchise by being charmingly bad, but gets away from being literally bad by not taking itself seriously on any level. However, they do occasionally get it right on the money. The Wesker betrayal, the whole Lisa Trevor thing, and the simplistic combat design shows that the people behind it still have talent to create something truly great. It's not the most apt comparison, but Stephen King books do a similar thing where the books will usually have flimsy plots, but still end up being great works sometimes due to the focus on how human his characters are, and his monster/horror design is damned great. It's that charming balance between the bad and the good that gives the media its flavor and attracts its fans in spite of not being literally perfect. Resident Evil not only stands the test of time, but it can also stand strongly against the AAA market of now and the future. It is a true classic of the industry that unfortunately has not been seen many times since, but like I said after Assassin's Creed Syndicate, while the industry might not have taken the torch from Capcom and reached new heights of creativity, at least we have the game that started it all to enjoy whenever we want. I'll leave you this week with a final scoreboard and a fun victory for gamers. Thanks for taking this trip with me through the wacky world of Umbrella's mastermind.